Now you have the tape of the program still in there.
Yes.
Is it still running or did you stop it?
We're still running.
Okay. That was good, Doc. It was 50 minutes long. It was 50 minutes.
It really was good.
Yeah.
It looked fantastic.
Yeah. And I
That
saw you
angle?
switching around,
Yeah,
and I told you that angle would work,
The angle
man.
was like nice.
Yeah.
And that suit, you
What? You mean?
wearing that suit. Straight
Just
up.
a sport
That
jacket,
angle
man.
from over here?
This is a $39 sport
Oh,
jacket.
No, that look.
I was going to wear black,
Let me
but
cut-
how
let me
does
cut
this
to
look?
it.
That looks good. That looks good.
Hold on, let me cut to it. That angle right there.
Yeah.
Oh, that was like
That's the ball.
that was like off the hook.
Yeah. With you out of focus and me in focus, that was good.
Mm-hmm.
That was real good.
And then there was moments when Doc was in focus,
And then I was out of
and you were
focus.
out, and it was great.
Right. Hi, and welcome to the Insightful Journal with Dr. Lawrence Robinson. I'm Jerome Roberts, and we're taking this opportunity today to introduce Dr. Lawrence Robinson, MD, MPH, to you, the audience for the Insightful Journal. I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Robinson a few years ago when he appeared on a TV show with Trudy Haynes, the late, great Trudy Haynes. And I really liked Dr. Robinson. When he asked me to come work with him, I said, great, let's produce some good content. Dr. Robinson, welcome. And you're a native Philadelphian. As a matter of fact, you went to a great high school, West Philadelphia. I was born and raised, as they say, with Will Smith. Tell us a little bit about Overbrook and how you got to where your education, because your educational background is just awesome.
Well, I started off actually as a twin. So I have a twin sister.
Okay.
And I remember that there was a company called Penn Fruit,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a grocery store. And they opened two grocery stores, and they had a contest for the first twins that were born on the opening of the grocery store.
Okay.
So we were the Penn Fruit twins. And I think we won like diaper service
Right.
and all of this formula
Right.
and all of that.
Right.
So I started off lucky.
That's not bad. You grew up in an area called the Bottom.
That's right. The old original Black Bottom right there at 37th Street, right off of Lancaster Avenue.
Right.
And it was a very vibrant area in those days. My father had a barber shop there, and then later on he worked for a steel mill, was a United Steelworker.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to Drew Elementary School.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if that's still there. I think it might still be there. Drew
I'm not
Elementary School.
sure.
It was right there in the Science Center area.
Right.
Yeah, so
Well, I think both of those schools have been knocked down,
Mhm.
and there's a whole development now with Drexel University over in University City. But then, okay, so the Bottom, in case people don't know, is the bottom of Lancaster Avenue. Now, Lancaster Avenue is the oldest highway in the United States of America. It goes back to the Native Americans, and they used to use that road to go all the way out to the main line. So and it's an interesting area of Philadelphia. It's old and vibrant, and even today, it's still vibrant, although it's been the G word, gentrified. Now, you ended up there, then you ended up at Overbrook High School.
yes, well, what happened was the redevelopment authority came through that neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the people that lived in that area were forced to relocate to a different part of the city.
Right. That was common back in the 50s.
Yeah, I'll never forget it. My father said the redevelopment authority has taken our home, and the money that they gave me is not enough money to buy a new home. So I remember that as a child.
Right.
That is what my father told me.
Mm-hmm.
But we were fortunate because the area where I moved to later in West Philadelphia on around 56 in Lancaster or Lansdowne,
Mm-hmm.
that area was changing. It was going through gentrification from the other aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, we were able to get a home relatively cheaply.
Now that is when they had what they used to call white flight from Philadelphia.
Right.
So many neighborhoods today that are predominantly African American were very white back in the 50s and early 60s. So Philadelphia lost about, in the 1950 census, I think Philadelphia had 2 million people. By the 1960 census, they were down to about 1.6 million. Then in the 1970 census, I think they dropped down to 1.4 million. And it would have been lower except for Hispanic immigration into
Yes.
the city.
Yeah, immigration is definitely one of the things that has kept the city alive and kept it from a major decline in population. And as a result of that, a lot of other cities actually became more populous than Philadelphia, like Houston,
Right.
and Phoenix.
Houston,
and-
San Antonio,
Yeah.
Phoenix, they all are right up there behind Philadelphia in population.
Well, actually, more population. in
Yes,
Philly.
true.
Yes.
True. Philadelphia being an old industrial city, and it lost all of the industry. I remember growing up in the 50s and 60s, you go out and get a job just like that. All that industry is gone. I'm talking about a good paying job, and all that industry has left. But anyway, getting back to the high school, the neighborhood you moved into, which was the reverse gentrification, it was the white flight, that got you in Overbrook High School.
Yes.
Okay.
That's how I ended up in that part of the city. And I was also very fortunate to be part of, I guess at that time it was Johnson who was the president, and they had what they called the War on Poverty. So I benefited from the War on Poverty by joining a program called AFNA, the American Foundation for Negro Affairs. It was a group that was headed by a very prominent Philadelphian by the name of Samuel London Evans. And I'll never forget it. I think I was in ninth grade. My guidance counselor called me to the office. I had always done good in terms of testing. So I had like a very high IQ, and I had done well on all of the testing that they had done. So my guidance counselor, recognizing that, asked me if I wanted to join this program, which was called New Access Routes to Professional Careers.
Okay.
And I joined the program, and I joined the aspect of the New Access Routes to Medical Careers.
Okay.
So at that point, I was basically on a track up to medical school. We had summer enrichment programs. I got a summer job at the physiology laboratory at the University of Pennsylvania. I'll never forget it.
Okay.
We were studying physiology
Right.
using turtles. And so it was really interesting. So I actually had the opportunity to work in a laboratory. And I remember we had a program that we did at Temple, because
Okay.
Temple was the school that was supporting us at that time. And we would go there for lectures. And I remember Sam Evans had a lecture series called The Frontiers of Knowledge. And he would teach us about all sorts of things, mathematics, and, many different things that were very useful, to going to school. And they also helped us to fill out our applications and apply to schools.
That's interesting. I'm familiar with Sam Evans. He was very prominent back then, and he helped a lot of people in Philadelphia. Now, we have to remind the audience, perchance, that back in the late 50s, going through the 60s, civil rights, voting rights, everything was at the front of the top of mind in America. You had the news where, blacks were trying to vote and getting killed and getting hosed, and all of that was going on at this time. So also, the Vietnam War was going on at this time.
I just missed it. Just missed it.
Yeah, I had a high draft number, so I was very fortunate. Plus, I stayed in college, 5 or 6 years. But now, coming out of Overbrook, you were blessed to get accepted to Harvard. Now, how did that happen?
Well, it's interesting. I had an older brother. And my brother got into Yale.
Okay.
So actually, all three of us, my sister, my brother, and myself, we were all Ivy Leaguers.
Okay.
So my brother went to Yale, I went to Harvard, and my sister went to the University of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So I didn't really know what school I wanted to go to, but I knew I wanted to beat my brother out. So, and my brother went to Yale. The only thing I could think of that was better was Harvard.
Yeah, that's true. That's
So
true.
that was my motivation,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
And it wasn't even what my family wanted to do, because my family, they thought that I would be better if I went to a historical black college.
My family felt the same
Howard,
way.
Harry,
Yeah. Yeah.
one of those schools.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where all of the people previous, that had made it to college. Because in
Right.
my generation, they hadn't. My father just had a high school degree. But I had an aunt, and she went to Cheney, which was the HBCU. So I decided I didn't want to go to the HBCU. Not that I had anything against it, but I wanted to beat my brother out.
Well-
So since my brother went to Yale, I had to go to Harvard.
Yeah. Now, of our last half a dozen or dozen presidents, half of them went to Yale or Harvard, either undergraduate or law school.
Yeah, most of Congress also.
Yeah, that's true.
Graduated from the
That's true.
Supreme Court as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it has a very famous. I'll never forget it. The room that I stayed in was the Franklin D. Roosevelt room, and there was a picture, a letter, original letter, framed letter on the wall, written by Roosevelt in my room.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Harvard has gone through so many changes. As a matter of fact, when FDR was president, they were talking about that Harvard had too much of a Jewish audience, and when they were started to pay attention to that, and this is back in the 40s. And then what the sister who used to be the president of Harvard went through most recently. So, that has been an interesting dilemma with Harvard.
Well, there is a whole historical context, and in fact, Harvard actually, because I've attended some meetings on it, are at the forefront of trying to do reparations, because the money that was originally came from John Harvard, I think, was traced back to the slave trade.
Okay.
And a lot of the people there in that area of Boston made their money, to shipping.
Right.
And of course, the slave trade.
Absolutely.
Was a large part of that.
Absolutely.
So there is a recognition of that historical background, and Harvard being very liberal.
Right, right.
They've actually held meetings to discuss, how they should do that. In fact, most of the Ivy Leagues are doing that as well.
True.
Princeton,
True.
Princeton, all of them
True.
are moving in that direction.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to attend Brown University on a full scholarship because Brown was doing the same thing. And this was back in the late 60s going into the 70s, the full scholarships, just because I was tall, dark, and handsome. Now, one of your roommates in the big old dorm was Bill Gates, obviously of Microsoft fame.
Yes, well, Bill Gates was my housemate. And I, at that time, my mother called it playing with computers. So I was a member of the computer, and I actually used to build computers on the floor, literally. I would get like parts and import them from like Taiwan and places like that, and put chips and processors and power supplies and stuff like that together. And I would literally make computers on the floor. And I even had my own brand of computers, sort of like Dell did, and it was called Quantum Professional Computers. So I had my own line of computers. Yeah. But my mother, she objected to it.
Did
so
she not say, I didn't send you to Harvard to play with computers?
That's what she told me.
Okay.
Because they wanted me to be a medical doctor or a professional.
Right.
They didn't want me to play with computers. So I gave it up.
Oh, wow. So then you left there and came back to Philadelphia to go to University of Pennsylvania Medical School?
Yes, yes. I went to the University of Pennsylvania. Now, I had gotten into many different medical schools, but it was family, basically, that made me move back to Philadelphia. My cousin was Hardy Williams.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Hardy Williams is my cousin. And I'll never forget it. We had like a Christmas Eve party that we did every year. And my mother and family, they would cook 100 pounds of chitlins and 50 pounds of hog maws.
Okay.
And they'd be all gone before the night was over. So, like, everybody would come to this party. All of the senators, the state senators, the state representatives like Hawkins and people like that. Hardy, of course, would come, and the judges, Charlie Durham, all these people would come to that party. And I think that at that party, my parents discussed it with them, and they said, we want him to get into the University of Pennsylvania
Okay.
and come back out to Philly.
Okay.
So that was his district, Hardy
Hardy Williams, right.
Yeah,
Right.
covered the sugar Penn.
Right. Now, Hardy Williams he was prominent in the Philadelphia political scene.
Yes.
So you were blessed with Hardy Williams and the other gentleman.
And Sam Evans. That's
Sam
right.
Evans.
Yeah, I had the...
These were prominent blacks in the not only were they forward in the civil rights movement, but they were forward in elevating, and those who were blessed to be selected by them, some of them went on and prospered very well, as you did, sir.
Yes. So I'll never forget it. Hardy Williams was famous for his stance on independent politics.
Right.
So he was one of the first people that actually had independent, that was not necessarily against Democrats, but had a different sense in how the movement would work. And that opened up a lot of avenues in those days to black politicians in Philadelphia. I'll never forget him. He was a wonderful person.
Oh, yeah, that was good. Now, you came back to Philly and went to University of Pennsylvania's medical school.
Yes.
And then you left Philly again and went to your residency.
Yeah.
Yeah, now you did your residency in Chi-Town?
In Chicago. So
Right.
now this is my brother's influence again.
Okay.
So I knew that I wanted to do a residency and in a major city.
Right.
So I didn't even apply to any place that was outside of the major city. So I applied to New York City, I applied to Chicago, and I think that was probably it.
Okay.
I didn't even apply
Right.
to any places that I
Right.
didn't want to go.
Right.
So I got into, of course, all of the residency programs I applied to, but my brother was living in Chicago, and he was a vice president of a bank, the First National Bank of Chicago. And he said, come on, come to Chicago and we'll buy a condo and we'll move in together.
Right.
So I said, well, that's an excellent deal.
Right,
I'll move in with
right.
my brother, we'll get a condo
Right.
on Lakeshore Drive, which is what we did.
Right.
We got a condo on, what was that? 4800
Okay.
Lakeshore Drive in a building
Okay.
called the Newport.
Yeah, now,
I'll never forget it.
if you're not familiar with Lakeshore Drive, it's a
South.
very prominent area of Chicago.
Yeah, well, that's where they had the Muslim compounds.
Yeah.
So, like, Elijah Muhammad, all of them lived there.
Right, right.
I remember Jesse Jackson.
Yeah, like I said, it's nice. It's nice.
That was a prominent area. That area was actually called Kenwood.
Okay.
Is what the term for that area
Got it.
was.
Now, before you got to Penn, at Harvard, you studied botany.
Well, it's interesting. I did a liberal education. So, when you are pre-med, you can major in whatever you want to.
True.
You don't have to major in a science.
Right.
And in fact, what I find is that you are more valuable in terms of medicine if you had a broader interest outside of medicine.
Okay.
Because medicine is more like an art than it is like a hard science. So, there were your engineers and your chemists and stuff like that, but there were also people who would do psychology and, social relations and, and in my case, my major was psych and SocRel, psychology and social relations. And then I took some courses on botany on the side. So that gave me a appreciation of plants and their aspect in terms of medicine. So a medical doctor is what's called a allopath. And if you look up the meaning of an allopath is a plant doctor. So, you have a surgeon or that area, well, they cut whatever. You have osteopaths who deal with bones and manipulations. You have chiropractics, so you have like different branches. You even have what's called homeopaths. So a homeopath was Hahnemann,
Right.
was a homeopath.
Right.
And that was another branch of medicine. But I'm an allopath, so I'm a plant doctor.
Right.
So all of the medicines that we use, they are derived from plants. And think about it. If it's a pain medication, it's developed from like an opium or a root, like a Valium, it's a root. Your anti-inflammatories like aspirin, they're from a bark of a tree.
Okay.
Penicillin is a mold or a
Mold. Yeah.
fungus.
Right.
So everything that we use is based on plants. So it was very interesting to really be able to understand that.
Yeah. We're going to get back to that because some of the projects you're involved with today relate directly to agriculture and plants and feeding oneself. But we're going to go back to, you were in Chicago at Rush Hospital.
Rush
Now,
Presbyterian St. Luke's.
Yeah, Rush is part of University of Chicago.
No,
It's
Rush
not?
University. It's its own separate university.
Oh, okay.
It's not far from there, but it's a separate university altogether.
Okay.
And it's actually expanded and grown quite a
Right.
bit since I was there.
Okay.
Yeah. It's sort of like Jefferson.
Oh, got
Jefferson
it.
is a university
Yeah,
now.
Jefferson has become a university.
So Rush is a university like Jefferson.
Okay, good. So now how long were you in Chicago? Because after that you moved to New York City? No, or Baltimore.
Yeah, I went to
one?
Baltimore.
Okay.
So I did my residency in internal medicine
Okay.
in Chicago. And after I completed my residency in internal medicine, then I moved to Baltimore to continue my study at Johns Hopkins.
Okay.
So I did a residency in preventive medicine, and I obtained my master's in public health from Johns Hopkins. I was what was called a preventive medicine resident.
Okay.
And my
Now, how does that distinguish from other residents?
well, it's public health.
Okay,
It's basically
got
a
it.
public health residency.
Okay.
So I had already completed all of my clinical work.
Right.
So this is more looking at issues like maternal and child health. Health Services Administration is a large aspect of that. International health, aerospace medicine, all of those are parts of the preventive medicine.
So-
of course, you have to do epidemiology and biostatistics.
So did that kind of propel you on into your career in health management?
Yeah, well, I was at that
as a
point. I was
doctor?
tracked. I
Yeah.
was tracked into it, and
Right.
most of the people, when they saw me in that area, they say, "Oh, that's the administrative doctor."
Right,
They
right.
don't really view that as
Right.
like hard science.
Right.
Like I wasn't cutting in a surgeon
Right.
or
Right.
prescribing pills for diabetes.
Right.
It was population-based medicine. So the main difference, I would say, is that in public health, you deal with populations or groups of people as opposed to individuals. So a regular doctor basically has a patient and then he treats the patients
Right.
and so forth. But in public health, it's population based.
Yeah.
So we look at epidemiology, we look
Right.
at biostatistics, we look at outbreaks,
Yeah.
epidemics,
Right.
how disease, transfer from place to place. Very interesting areas like hygiene
Right.
and how to prevent diseases.
Yeah.
All of your immunization programs and stuff like that, those are all public health programs. So it was a very interesting area. And I think that I was drawn into that area because of my experience at Harlem Hospital.
Okay.
So I actually worked on the floor as a clinician at Harlem Hospital. And I'll never forget it. I used to do two things, which I was pretty good at. I used to run the sickle cell disease
Okay.
program.
Right.
And also, they stuck me in the asthma room. Okay. So it was a chronic state where you got the same people coming back. And every time they come back worse. And then I wonder, well, what am I really doing? Because they're not getting any better. Every time they come back, they're worse, And I say, well, there's got to be a better way
Mm-hmm.
to deal with medicine in terms of just treating people who
Mm-hmm.
have disease. And so that's how I had the concept, which is the public health concept, is to prevent disease
Mm-hmm.
and work with, it before
Mm-hmm.
it happens.
Right. Now it's interesting. My oldest daughter just got a master's in public health and statistics, and she'll probably go to work for either an insurance company or the government or something, because that's what they do. They track macro numbers and to see where the impact is going, like the growth in AIDS in a minority population or something like that. That's all done through statistics of public health.
Yeah, and of course, the whole coronavirus is a perfect example
Well,
of
that's
that. That's
true.
all public health.
That's true.
At this aspect,
That's true.
even how to prevent disease, whether you should use masks and control of crowds and all of those things, and even when you look at it in terms of herd dynamics. One of the things that we know is that you reach a certain level of the disease in the population, and then people develop what's called immunity to it.
Right.
And once it reaches that level, then you say you have herd immunity.
Right.
And that basically stops the rapid transfer of the disease.
Right.
So that was one of the principles of the vaccination programs. They wanted to vaccinate people and raise the level of people who had antibodies, to the disease, and then it would give you protection.
Well, it's ironic that the spread of the pandemic was mismanaged in America. And part of it, I feel as though, because at the beginning of the pandemic, the president at that time disregarded the information that the previous president had given him to handle a pandemic.
Well, it goes back way before that. One of the interesting things is if you look at it from a historical standpoint, it's predictable because there are cycles of when these epidemics occur. Of course, they're happening more often now because the society is changing more rapidly than it did.
Right.
The last major epidemic we had before that was called Van Economo's influenza, and that was right after the war.
Right.
That was 1920,
Right.
1919, something
18,
like that.
19, 20.
Yeah.
The so-called Spanish flu.
Yeah, and that killed millions of people. In fact,
Well, that was worldwide, but in America, it only killed 750,000.
Well, Philadelphia was very hard hit.
Philadelphia was very hard hit.
Because it tracked the movement
Right.
of soldiers.
Right.
And they didn't really understand disease at that time. So when you have dense populations, it's spread rapidly through those populations. America was more agrarial at that time.
Right.
And there were less people that were densely
Right.
in
Philadelphia
that's
was
right.
very effective.
very effective. In fact, so many people died in Philadelphia that they had to build trenches to bury the people, mass
Oh,
graves.
wow. Okay.
And I'll never forget it. My grandfather lived through the epidemic, and he said that it killed his brother and his sister. Both died
Wow.
from the pandemic. And he
Okay.
said he had it as well. And he actually gave me his remedy, what he thought saved him from death.
Okay.
I do know that the virus is heat liable.
Okay.
The problem is the temperature at which you have to raise it to will probably cause brain damage before
Right.
it would actually kill the virus.
Okay.
So a lot of the procedures they had were not effective because it's just much collateral damage. But my grandfather told me that what he did was he wrapped himself up like a mummy
Okay.
and poured liniment on
Right.
the wrappings.
These are old, quote unquote, old
Yeah.
solutions.
And he said he sweated the flu out of it. Now he lived to be like 90 something,
Right.
And everybody else died around
Right.
him, but he was the only one that lived. So
Right.
I'm just saying, had to be something to it,
Right. Yeah.
And I do remember, talking with him vividly about how he remembered it. That talks about
Now you spent some time in New York City at Harlem Hospital and Columbia Presbyterian Hospital and Columbia teaching.
Well, actually, Columbia Presbyterian has the affiliation with, it's called the Health and Hospital Corporation.
Right.
So that's the corporation that runs all of the municipal hospitals in
New York City.
You know,
yes.
actually, Philadelphia is unique because Philadelphia is the only major city that does not have a municipal hospital.
Yeah, well, it
We
closed.
used to have
it closed in
a
the 60s.
Philadelphia General, which is a
Right.
well-recognized,
It was.
you know, famous hospital.
Right. Matter of fact, they used to say that Philadelphia General, if the president was ever in Philly and got shot, they'd take him to Philadelphia General.
It was
And
well
I'm like,
known.
Philadelphia General? I'm like, that's like a ghetto hospital. But they
No.
give you some of the
It
best
was
emergency
one of the
treatment.
best hospitals in the world.
Yes.
So one of the things that I think was probably one of the worst things that happened with the city is the elimination of the municipal hospital
Yeah.
in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And I think Rizzo was the one that was in charge of it.
I think so. Yeah.
You know, it was a major problem. And as a result of that, what happened was they developed the district health centers.
Okay. Yes.
Which were supposed to be the replacement,
Right.
but it's nowhere near the same.
No.
You know, so New York has and continues to have a municipal hospital system,
Yes.
very strong municipal
Yes.
health system. And what they do is they contract with the local universities for the hospital. So Harlem Hospital was contracted with Columbia
Okay.
Presbyterian
Okay.
to run their hospital.
Right.
So all of the doctors there were professors at Columbia.
Okay.
So I was appointed as a assistant professor of medicine at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital
Okay.
and assigned to Harlem Hospital to run the hypertension program there.
Okay. Now, about the time that you were there was the time I was also living in New York City, and my two older daughters were born at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in the early mid '80s. Yeah.
It was a wonderful hospital. I mean, it had its problems,
Yeah.
like the elevators didn't work.
Yeah.
And they were always short on supplies.
Really?
Yeah. But I was very resourceful. So I made sure that I had my stash. So what I would do, when I get something, I'd take two of them.
Okay.
And then I'd store it in my cabinet.
Right.
That way, late at night when they didn't have anything, I would
Right.
say, I said, that's a shame. No needles, no nothing. Then I go to my cabinet to get the needle out for my stuff. You see
Okay.
what I'm saying?
I understand.
So I was smart to have to deal with it, but they're chronically short of supplies and the facilities needed.
Well, I'm glad
expansion.
my two older children got out of there with no difficulty.
Well, they probably had me as their doctor
probably
because I was
did.
prepared for it.
They probably did. Now, you left New York and came to Philly again.
Okay, so now that's another interesting story. So my parents at that point were getting old, and they went to Artie Williams, and they said, Artie, they get Larry back here to Philadelphia.
Right.
Okay, so I never even thought of it. They put my name in to be health commissioner.
Right.
You know, Artie
Okay.
Williams, put my name in.
Right.
Because he was supporting
Rendell. Right.
And so he said, well, Rendell said, what you want? He said, here, make my cousin the health commissioner.
Right.
He's got well qualified, here's his resume and
Yeah,
stuff
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Okay. I didn't even know anything about it. I was living in New York. I had a apartment, I was a professor at Columbia. I wasn't thinking about moving back to Philadelphia. I was fine where I was,
Yeah,
But then when they told me you're the commissioner of health for Philadelphia,
Right.
what could you do?
Right. Right.
I moved back to Philadelphia.
You were able to do that through two very successful administrations. Now that's normally unheard of.
That's unheard of.
Yeah,
that's
to
unheard of.
last in that
you
kind of
see,
position.
I had a position that I kept, which was a civil service position. So my position, officially on paper, was deputy commissioner.
Okay, got it.
But whenever there wasn't anybody else, then I became the de facto commissioner.
Right.
And I think I went through something like 4 or 5 commissioners.
Of course, because they're political appointed positions.
Yeah. So I was able to maintain my position because I had that deputy position to fall back on, and I never gave that title up. So I always kept the title of deputy commissioner. And so let me see, Clifford. Estelle Richmond, and I think that was the first time when it was not a doctor
Okay.
that was commissioner. And one of the agreements that they made was that the deputy had to be a doctor.
Okay. Got
because to give her advice and stuff like that. So
Right.
we had several
Non-medicals as health commissioners. Okay.
I think it was after her. I think it was John Domzalski, who was a
Okay.
lawyer. Then there was Carmen Paris.
Okay.
So there were several of
Right.
them. And
Right.
then after that, I think it was Joanne Godley. She was a physician. And then Dr. Walter Sue, he was a physician, very
Okay.
competent a physician. But none of them lasted. And when I came in, what happened was Bobby Ross,
Okay.
who was my alumni at University of Penn. I think he was like a year older than I was.
Okay.
That's before me.
Okay.
There was a program for health for prison. And I think it was Lomax, Walter Lomax, that got the contract. First time ever it got the contract. And I think he even had an HMO
Right.
at that time.
He did.
Right. So as it turned out, Bobby Ross became the commissioner, and I became the deputy commissioner.
Okay.
You see,
Cool.
But it was better because my position was permanent. He only
Right.
lasted for a few months, and he was gone.
Right,
You know what I'm saying?
right,
And I was
right.
there for 2 terms. So
Right.
that was 8 years. 8 years. That's 16 years.
Now, when did you leave that? You left it when Nutter became
Yes,
mayor.
when Nutter became mayor.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So you were deputy health commissioner for something like 17 years.
That's right. That's correct.
It's not bad. What kind of issues in Philadelphia did you observe that might have been peculiar to Philadelphia as opposed to other big cities?
Well, interestingly enough, it's pretty much the same.
Okay.
Like, Baltimore, New York, Chicago, all of them are pretty much the same in terms of the health problems that they have. Some might be a little worse than other. But your problems are basically around various different factors.
Okay.
Not just socioeconomics. A lot of people try to attribute health disparities and problems with health to the socioeconomic conditions. They say that people are poor and they're uneducated, and that's the reason why they're sick.
Right.
Just because you're poor and educated does not mean that you have to be sick.
Right.
And in fact, at that time, I was a member of a nonprofit called the National Black Leadership Initiative on Cancer, the NBLIC. I was the chairman. And I'll never forget it. There was another Dr. Robinson who went on to go to the Center for Disease Control. I think he did smoking and health. And they left it on me. So I think they got the names confused because
Okay.
they thought I was the other Dr. Robinson.
Okay.
I really wasn't. And so they said, well, here's your group. Here's the minutes and here's the treasury.
Right.
You're the new director of it. And so I took it,
Right,
and
right,
ran with it. So it was born out of the fact that Philadelphia, when you looked at the population of blacks in Philadelphia, their cancer rates were higher than heart disease, which was very unusual because heart disease is normally the number one.
Number one killer, yes.
But in Philadelphia, when you did your analysis, you found that it was cancer.
Cancer? Wow.
Yeah, so we knew that there were some issues going on that were causing an increased rate of cancer in the area. I also had a position as a board member of the American Cancer Society. I was elected to the American Cancer Society. I'll never forget it. We had a conference to look at the issue of health disparities in, Pennsylvania. So I had a professor. He's deceased now. His name was Ruttman. He was a professor emeritus from the University of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And he worked with us to collect some statistical information. And we used that information to go to the federal government and ask them to include different categories into the data that they were collecting, because we say you're missing the categories that are truly responsible for health disparities. So let me give you an example of this. This is really a breakthrough analysis. What we did was we got data called the SEER data,
Mm-hmm.
SEER. That's data that's collected by the federal government on cancer, and it looks at many different aspects of it.
Mm-hmm.
Then what we did was we went to the government, to what's called USAID, which is Aid to Developing Countries. And we got the data that they had collected for Haiti. So the population in Haiti is comparable to the African American population, very much so. Same mixture with the Native American. In that case, it's French, and here it's with the Anglo-Saxons or English, but pretty much the same. It's just that group got off the boat before we did. It's very similar. Now, in terms of socioeconomics, though, Haiti has the lowest socioeconomic status
Right.
on the continent.
Right.
And a lot of people know it's North America. Haiti
Right.
is North America because you don't get to South America until you get down by Colombia.
Right.
So a lot of people don't realize all those islands are still North America.
Right.
So when we looked at that data, we compared it to the data from people in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
So what we did was we adjusted the data for age, for sex, and so forth, so that it was comparable data. And what you find is that the adjusted cancer rates are much higher for people in Washington, D.C. than they are in Haiti. So you argue, if it's socioeconomics, then why is that the case? Because people in Haiti are way poorer and less educated than they are in Washington, D.C.
Right.
But yet the cancer rates are high. Then what we did was we compared black men to black women in Washington, D.C. Now, these are people that live in the same house, eat the same food, okay? Yet, when you compare the two, the adjusted cancer rates for men are much higher than they are for women.
Okay.
So I argue, if it's socioeconomics, then why is that the case?
Right. Okay.
So there's much argument to be made that there are other variables that are responsible for these disparities in cancer. So it's very interesting. The American Cancer Society had a national conference on health disparities. And I had the opportunity to speak and to talk about the data that I had collected because I argued that we were missing the point if we thought it was just socioeconomics. And I'll never forget it. They said, Dr. Robinson, they said, you make some very interesting comments. They said, we're going to put you on the panel to further investigate this.
They wanted to kill it, in other words.
Oh, I was in trouble in
Yes.
that case, you know.
Yes.
It was really interesting because, you know, when we looked at the data, you know, and I tried to couch it so that I didn't get thrown out or tarred and feathered because I
Right.
said, people don't like to deal with the issues that make them feel uncomfortable.
Right.
And socioeconomics, that's a comfortable issue to deal
Right.
with.
Right.
I said, but some of the factors are very uncomfortable and people don't want to mention what they are. So I said, let me just tell you what some of these factors are. I said, institutional racism. Okay. I said, environmental justice. I said, equal but unequal treatment. And then I cited the literature to support each of my contentions. There was an IOM, the Institute of Medicine, did a major breakthrough report on it. And I cited all of the data to support the issues that I brought up.
I was interested because that data would support one empirical element, and that is it's stressful being black in America. And when you add the stress down to everything else, you get the higher rates of virtually everything.
Yeah, well, it's with the things that cause the stress.
Right.
I mean, like, for example, living on top of a toxic plume of
Right.
chemicals in
Yes.
South Philly.
Yes.
That's going to put some major
Yes.
stress on you.
I live in an area of Philly called Nicetown, and they say Nicetown has a high degree of asthma because all the trees were taken out.
Right.
And then now they're going through and planting a lot of trees.
Yeah, well, you got lead. I mean,
Yeah.
you got all sorts of environmental issues.
Right.
You know, and the people in those areas are capable of dealing with them
Yes.
because of their circumstances.
Yes.
I mean, if you got money or whatever, you'll move.
Yeah,
You go
that's
to the
true.
suburbs and go someplace else.
That's true.
But these people are basically stuck there.
Yeah,
You know.
I'm not exactly stuck, but I do understand what you're saying. But let's deal with two things that you are very actively involved with now. One is you have a prison initiative that you're doing to try to get health into the prisons because the prison system here in Philadelphia has been botched so bad that they're getting fined with all of the deaths that are happening.
Yeah, well, I go back to the very beginning of this issue. The Philadelphia prison used to be part of the health department.
Yes.
So the health department had the responsibility of providing health and medical services to the prison.
Mm-hmm.
Then along came this wave of privatization,
Mm-hmm.
and they decided that they could make more money by privatizing the prisons.
Mm-hmm.
And what I always say is that this is actually a key word for giving money to your friends.
Mm-hmm.
Privatization, that's the
Mm-hmm.
key word.
Mm-hmm.
Money to your friends.
Right.
So in any event, I was actually in charge of it. So I had to go, and I remember sitting in the prisons many nights, going through charts, looking at botched, services, poor management, they couldn't even get issues like suicide right.
Mm-hmm.
And Philadelphia is the oldest prison in the country.
Yes.
And so I say, well, you would think after all of these years, you would have finally got it right.
Right.
Nah, they didn't have it right.
Okay.
So, I can think of incidences where, a person would cut their wrists, how they got the razor blade or the knife to cut themselves. That's another issue.
Yeah, that's
I
true.
can't understand.
Right.
But then the people would just stand around and watch the person bleed to death.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wanted to touch him, nobody
Right.
knew first aid.
Right.
And I said, any Boy Scout knows how to stop a wound.
Right.
You
Right.
put a tourniquet on it.
Right.
No training or anything.
Right.
So it's been an ongoing problem, but now it's gotten a lot worse because we don't have any correctional officers.
Right.
So nobody wants to work on those jobs. Well, this is not true just for the prisons. This is
Yeah.
also true for the police too.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to be a policeman in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the statistics in terms of the number of positions that are paid for and the number of people filling them, all of those positions are down low.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, with the prisons, it's half.
Mm-hmm.
So more than half of the positions that are allocated are unfilled.
Yeah. Yeah. So the prison system in Philly has been screwed up for a minute.
So that means that they can't even manage the floor.
Right.
So everybody's on what you call constant lockdown. So, there have been cases where, they lock the person and don't come back to see him again until the morning.
Yeah. And then
And then they had an asthma attack or whatever, and they find them dead.
Right.
Nobody even attended to them.
Right.
There was a case just recently, and it was well publicized. A guy had diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't give him insulin for 6 days.
Ooh.
How can you sit there,
Okay.
for 6 days and the person has diabetes and you don't give him any insulin?
Right.
That's needless steps.
Yeah.
And what makes it worse is that the family and everybody sues and they're winning the lawsuits.
Yeah.
So it's
But it doesn't doesn't bring back the person who
Of
died.
course not.
So that can be troubling. You have another initiative that you're involved in. You have a very nice piece of property in Wilmington, Delaware that you're developing in that neighborhood down there. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Wilmington is a place where seniors are going now.
Mm-hmm.
That's the new place. If you look at your ratings, Delaware is listed as one of the top places
Mm-hmm.
for seniors to go. So I'm a senior citizen myself, and I am supporting services
Mm-hmm.
for seniors. Now, I was on the board of PCA,
Mm-hmm.
the Philadelphia
Corporation for Aging.
I was on their primetime health board. I was actually
Okay.
one of the founding members of that board
Mm-hmm.
that dealt with health promotion and other issues around health for senior citizens. So it gave me some experience in this area. So what I would like to do is to have a health a center
Mm-hmm.
in Wilmington
Mm-hmm.
where you can provide what they call it a life program,
Mm-hmm.
which is like living independent for elderly.
Okay.
And
Life.
basically-
LIFE.
Yeah.
Living
LIFE.
independent for elderly.
Yes. They have
Okay.
them here. Actually, every county has the program.
Okay.
So this program is designed to make seniors independent and
Mhm.
live in their homes as long as they can.
Okay.
And basically, what they do is they provide home health care services like, AIDS and stuff like that. And they have a daycare program where if the caretakers have to go to work or something like that, they can go to the daycare program during the day.
Okay.
And then at nighttime, they can go back, to their home when the other adults come back from work. And
Well,
so forth.
that's great. I think it would be a great addition to Wilmington. I visited that property with you a little while ago, and it's in a great location.
Well, it doesn't have any services.
Right.
So one of the things that happened in Wilmington, they had the archdiocese there, which provided most of the social services to
Okay.
that area.
Okay.
In fact, it's right down the street, a
Right.
large campus.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened is the archdiocese was tied up with the pedophile scandal.
Right.
So many of the priests were sued,
Okay.
and they had to declare bankruptcy.
Oh.
Lawsuits.
Okay. Got it.
So those buildings closed and have now been sold.
Right.
Other people have bought them. In fact, there is a guy, I think his name is Umar Johnson or something like that.
Yeah.
He is in
Dr. Ubar.
Yeah, he built a school.
Right.
And I'm sure
This
that would
school
not
is
have
not
been,
too far
that's
from
right.
you.
That's right.
Right.
And I'm sure that would not have been possible.
Right. Dr.
if
Umar
something-
Johnson is also from Philly.
Yeah.
In case you didn't know.
because the archdiocese went out of business, and they
Right.
provided the schools, all of that for
Right,
that area.
right, right.
So recognizing that, I saw that there was a need, and with my experience here in Philadelphia in that area.
Okay, you have a
it's-
great public health background, sir.
Yeah, but it's been a very problematic because of the coronavirus.
Okay.
So the coronavirus has been a major setback to all people who wanted to do business according to this time. Because basically you had a whole period where you were basically frozen
Correct.
and couldn't get anything done.
Correct.
There was no legal service. You couldn't get any people evicted.
Right.
You couldn't get control of your property. There was
Right.
no court. I mean, it was really bad. And then not only that, but the people who I was going to work with, several of them caught coronavirus and died.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's been a major setback. I mean, it's pretty much getting better now, but it was a major setback.
As we come out of the coronavirus and move forward, what type of initiatives are you looking to do vis-a-vis the Insightful Journal? How are you going to use the Insightful Journal to get your position out there, sir? And I like your positions. Very, very health-oriented on the macro scale.
I'm different than most doctors because, as you know, my background is not as an internal medicine doctor, but more as a person in public health. So, I have the background. I've done the epidemiology, the biostatistics. I've done the preventive medicine residency. So I look at things a lot different than most doctors do. And my whole concept is to work with people who are well as opposed to work with people who are sick.
Okay.
So we have what we call a disease-oriented model. So you don't go to see a doctor unless there's something wrong with you.
Unless you're sick.
That's right. And I think that should be just the opposite.
Yeah.
You should go to the doctor because he should have things that keep you well.
Right.
So as you can see, that's going to be my focus. There was a person that we interviewed, Dr. Burton, I believe, and he had a very interesting book. And so his book said, "How to Outlive Your Doctor."
Yeah.
I said, yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna go pick up that book. We had Fred Burton on not too long ago.
Yeah, so that's the concept,
Yeah.
because if you do the things that you should do in terms of health and eating properly and managing your stress and, the environmental issues and so forth, you can outlive the doctor that's doing the prescribed stuff,
Dr. Lawrence Robinson, the host of Insightful Journal, and we just did this to kind of give you a broad background of Dr. Lawrence Robinson's bio, his curriculum vitae, so to speak. And it's been a pleasure, sir. And as we move forward through Insightful Journal, they'll get to understand you better as you talk to many other health professionals and professionals in and around the city of Philadelphia and in and around the country. We've been to a couple of great conventions and stuff together, so I'm looking forward to getting all those people to talk to you.
And as always, I always like to start with the fact that what Martin Luther King said, that of all of the injustice in healthcare is by far the worst.
Dr. Lawrence Robinson, the Insightful Journal. I'm Jerome Roberts, and it is a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Cut. Good stuff.
How was it?
Very good. Very good.
Well, you just have to get me going. I can go.
Well, I'll tell you something. When I was on the phone with Dr. Weiss last night for about an hour. And I'm trying to get him on the show, and he says, yeah, well, Dr. Robinson likes to talk, so he could dominate the conversation. I'm like, oh, shit. Let me do a profile of you long form so people want to know you, they can look at it long form.
It's easy.
And it was easy because all I had to do was I made a list of, let me see, boom, 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 boom.
All you needed was one question. One question to lead into the next thing.
Now, how did you feel about that, Doc?
Well, that's just me.
Yeah.
Not pretentious about it.
Yeah,
This is easy.
but it'll work well on the when we post it.
Just try not to say something too controversial. Don't blame anybody for anything.